Now we're recording. All right, thank you. Okay, so again, as we go through this tonight, my goal is to help you feel really knowledgeable and informed, and also to have your specific questions answered. So let's go through this together, and let's start with interacting so that I can get you all warmed up. So when you hear the term human trafficking, what comes to mind? Is it someone being kidnapped by a stranger? Is it border crossing, cartels maybe? Is it online predators? Is it someone exploited? Let me move this out of the way by a person that they know, or do you just honestly, you're like, I really don't know. That's why I'm here. So, what are your first impressions when you hear the term human trafficking? What first comes to mind for you? Okay, exploitation. Yeah. Anyone else? What is your first impression? The reality is that all of these are expressions of human trafficking. Every single one of these have occurred, are occurring, and will continue to occur. But when we talk about what's happening here in the United States, what is most prevalent is someone being exploited by a person that they already know. I would say second to that is going to be the online predators. So when we look at the model here in the United States, that's what we're typically referring to. So again, if we're thinking about this from the perspective of our own loved ones, we want to be interacting with them and knowing who are they in relationship with, who are they talking to and connected with, because it could either be in person or online that someone is trying to groom them in order to exploit them. It's not necessarily, going to be that kidnapping scenario that we see in the movies. More than likely, it's going to be relational or online. Okay, I'm having a freeze moment with my whole situation here. Let me try to get my laptop to work. Okay, here we go. Okay, so let's talk about definitions real quick. Sex trafficking, the definition of that is recruitment, harboring, transporting, or obtaining a person for commercial sex through force, fraud, or coercion. Or if the victim is under 18, it's just trafficking, period. There's no need to prove force, fraud, or coercion. So again, there are different people involved in sex trafficking. There are those that are recruiting, those that are harboring individuals, those that may be transporting them, or they're obtaining them for the purposes of commercial sex. So there's a lot of different players that can be involved. It's not necessarily one person performing all of these acts, although it could be in the form of like a pimp. You're going to see it's kind of one person running a show. But when we look at trafficking, a lot of times there's organized crime involved, or there's gang related trafficking involved. And so you're going to see a group of people that are actually kind of performing different functions in the trafficking. When we look at labor trafficking, which is also a big issue here in the United States, I would say specifically in Texas. Um, yes, that's a great idea to end with prayer. Thank you for saying that. I will be sure to do that. When we look at labor trafficking, that is a form of human trafficking which a person is compelled to work through force, fraud, or coercion for someone else's financial gain. It's not simply like bad working conditions or low pay. This is an issue where this person is not free to leave because of manipulation, threats, intimidation, abuse. They may have debt that they've incurred by this individual. There's fear. They may have confiscated their documents. They're keeping them isolated and they're being controlled. So, labor trafficking, again, in the state of Texas, is also a pretty significant percentage of the trafficking expression here. And when we look at things like, again, we have landscape companies, we have construction companies, we have those low barrier agricultural companies or organizations that are, some of those are involved in labor trafficking. And then we have those that are brought maybe from other countries that they start out potentially doing labor trafficking in restaurants, nail salons, and then they can be eventually forced into the sex trafficking and put into brothels or the massage parlors that are sexually explicit. So, trafficking does not require crossing a border or being physically moved or held in chains. Most of the victims that we see are still, in our schools, they're in our hospitals, they're in our neighborhoods right now. So, it's not always that someone is completely removed from society and this is happening all behind closed doors. Sometimes they're moving fluidly throughout all sectors of normal society while being trafficked. So the likelihood of us potentially seeing something right in our own neighborhoods is very likely because it is happening right in front of us. Okay, so let's talk about the scope of the problem. This is the national picture, and this is according to the 2024 data from the National Human Trafficking Hotline. These are the number of hotline contacts that occurred in 2024. That's 32,309. Now, this is just what's being reported, right? Out of those, 21,865 potential victims were identified. 1 in 7 missing children are likely being sex trafficked, which is a pretty significant stat. And then 80 to 90% of victims are exploited by someone that they know, which is what we kind of talked about in the beginning. So when we look at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, you're looking at 27,800 reports of child sex trafficking. And 8,024 of those 32,309, they were contacts that came from victims or survivors themselves reaching out for help. So again, these are low numbers of people actually being willing to contact and identify when we know that there's a lot more happening around us. So I want you to keep that in mind as we kind of continue to go through this. Okay, let me pull down my screen here. Some hotlines are called, it's just zeroes in on the location of the caller. Wow. Okay, that is very interesting. I have heard that, again, some of the entities that are supposed to be helping with the victims are participating in exploitation. I have heard that as well. I have not personally ever seen evidence of that. But I'm not saying that it's not something that's happening. I just haven't personally seen that occur. But I have also heard those things as well. Okay, so now let's talk about Texas specifically. 313,000 estimated victims of human trafficking in Texas right now. And of those, 79,000 are minors in sex trafficking alone. Okay, so when we look at that number, sometimes numbers can kind of just be, a number and we sort of lose the effect of it. So I want us to visualize this. That number would fill the AT&T Stadium 4 times over. It is equal to the entire population of Corpus Christi, which is the 8th largest city in the state. So every person in that whole city would be trafficked. That's what that number represents. It is more than the combined cities of McKinney and Denton put together. That is how many estimated victims of human trafficking are in our state right now. And of those, a large percentage are minors that are being sex trafficked. So when we look at, again, just Dallas-Fort Worth, okay, we looked at Texas, now let's look at Dallas-Fort Worth. 35% of all Texas exploitation cases with only 26% of the population. That's what is happening in Dallas-Fort Worth. So 35% of all of the cases of Texas are happening right here. Okay? We have 26% of the state's population and 35% of the exploitation cases. So 1 in 3 exploitation cases in the entire state of Texas are happening right here. So that's 109,000 estimated people being exploited just in DFW right now. So when we look at I-35, let's talk about just that one because that is a huge corridor that we all know is being used right now for trafficking. Because of its connection to cities like Houston, which is the other largest city in the state for trafficking, it makes sense that it is covering this corridor where the demand is. When you have big cities like Houston or like Dallas Fort Worth, that's where we have sporting, venues and events happening. We have big conference centers. Anywhere that there are large entertainment venues, you're going to have opportunistic traffickers and pimps bringing their boys and girls and women into the cities in order to make money. That's what it's all about, is we've got to go where we're going to be able to make money. So that's what's happening in our own city. So I want us to talk about what stat out of those hits us the hardest tonight. Let's really dive in for a second and think about which one of these stats is surprising for you. Y'all feel free to unmute yourself and share or put it in the chat. Either way. Yeah. DFW numbers, the stadium. Yeah. It really does help to have a visual of what that number represents, because sometimes we get immune to the numbers and it doesn't even feel real to us anymore. Okay, so let's talk about who is targeted. Again, when we look at different vulnerabilities, it's going to look different in different geographical areas. In other countries, you have a lot more poverty that is a vulnerability that leads people to being exploited and targeted. There are individuals that will go, groups that are militia groups or insurgency groups, they will go to vulnerable villages just because they know that they're going to be able to be easy prey to get young kids. Here in America, it looks different. So we want to know who's going to get targeted. What are those vulnerabilities? So let's start on the left column. 85% of survivors of sex trafficking were childhood sexual abuse victims. So any person that has that in their background, that is that experience, there is a vulnerability now that I promise you predators just know. They know how to prey on those that have already been abused in that way. 87% grew up in households that were substance abusing. When you have that in your home life, it's very disruptive, right? It leaves kids in a lot of vulnerable positions, and that leaves them not understanding what safety and healthy relationships should even look like to begin with. 73% experienced abuse from a family member. Again, when you do not have the experience of what safe, healthy relationships should be, then it's very easy for someone who is an exploiter and a predator to be able to prey on that person. And 70% came from fatherless homes. So when we look at the survivor profile, that right there tells you a lot of the vulnerabilities that predators are actually they're going to find out really quick what the vulnerabilities are. They're experts in knowing how to find those that are going to be easy prey. So they will get you talking. They have the gift of gab. They will find out, what's going on in your household, and then they're able to work those angles to be able to groom individuals. Now, once an individual gets into the life of being trafficked, what we've seen is that the average time they spend being trafficked is around 4.5 years. Now, sometimes that means they get out of the life. Sometimes that means they end up dying in the life. There's, some of them they get out and they go back, but that's kind of on average the time that they spend. 74.6% of those that end up being sex trafficked have been arrested. They are the ones that end up being criminalized. Okay. It's not the traffickers or the pimps. They have their victims typically do all of the criminal activity. So if they're also, doing, they typically are also, getting drugs. So they're going to send the girls to do that. They will have them, go steal things, in order to, provide whatever they need. And so they end up with the records. And they're usually still being picked up for prostitution. We're making headway in that arena in the state of Texas. They're saying that they're no longer, charging them with prostitution, but it's still easier a lot of times for, you know, law enforcement to take a woman in for prostitution and at least get her off the streets for a little while. It's kind of how they view it. Give her a little bit of time to maybe, think through some options for her life. But it's very rare that the traffickers or the purchasers are facing any kind of justice. 58.7% have been incarcerated. So again, who's carrying the weight of the criminality? It's the victims themselves. 43% have attempted suicide, and 49% of them engage in self-harm. So they're cutting themselves. It's one of the hardest things actually for me to witness is when we would have survivors come into our safe house and they would just have all of these scars on their arms or inside their thighs were the most common places where they were cutting themselves. Others were burning themselves with lighters, just consistently. And again, when you have this much trauma, there's some weird, twisted relief in giving yourself an outlet for experiencing pain because you're so numb. Only 9% ever see their trafficker brought to justice. And that is where it's really very, very discouraging where we are as a society that we're still, we're not really going after this crime the way that we need to. Okay, so that's a little bit of a survivor profile so that you can see some of the vulnerabilities that lead someone into this life here in the United States, and then what they experience while they're being trafficked. Now, who's most at risk? We have the foster care and runaway community. That's 19 to 40% of homeless youth may be trafficked. So this is something that we have a lot of groups that are focused on the foster care kiddos because there's a real vulnerability to constant, displacement and lack of stability. And then when they turn 17 and they're aging out and they're kind of in this gap of being able to have services and support. And that's a real huge vulnerability. So that's a gap that I would say we need to give a lot of attention to. And then another thing that we saw with runaways, and this is here in DFW, we've worked a lot of these cases where you have an individual who is a runaway, and they're typically running away because there's domestic violence or abuse in the home. Something's happening in the home that, they're not feeling safe, and so they run away. Let's say that it's a 16-year-old girl. It's, midnight, and she heads out and she goes to the bus station. Well, the pimps and traffickers, they have individuals that are there at the bus stations and they're there every night. And they know the people that is their regular bus time and route. They see them all the time. So when a new, 16-year-old kid shows up with a backpack to get on the bus, they already know. They've already tagged them as a runaway. So they're easy to approach and say, hey, what, are you okay? You look like you need some help. And it's such an easy way to approach someone who's already extremely vulnerable. They don't have a place to live. They probably don't have any resources. They left, family, so they see them as a great vulnerable victim for them. And the stats are that 50% of runaways within 48 hours of running away will be approached by a pimp or a trafficker. So the likelihood of a kid running away and being approached is, 50%. Another really at risk population is the LGBTQ. That is a population that, again, is experiencing higher rates of family rejection and then potential homelessness and violence. And there's a lot more of societal rejection as well, isolation with this community. And what we've seen a lot with that community is that they go online and they're building community and relationship online. And that's where predators know to go to find that population. And then we have those that are domestic violence survivors. They're already in patterns of coercive control. And so, again, they're easily vulnerable. Those that are in any type of financial crisis. Traffickers love to exploit desperate need for income or housing. Let's say, for instance, you have a single mom. We saw this a lot going through COVID. Basic needs were not able to be met now. And that's where we saw a big uptick in some of the online exploitation happening. A lot more ads were being placed for women because that was an easy way to approach women. And we saw the ads that were behind the scenes on these sites. They were approaching women saying, hey, I could, on social media, I could help you make a lot of money. And so they know what to look for and what to opportunize on. Then, of course, we have the undocumented individuals. There's the fear of deportation is being weaponized as control. And one of the big ones that we see with youth is that isolation and online loneliness and the need for connection. They're easy to be exploited through social media. All right. Which do you think is the most under-identified as trafficking victims in our community? Y'all feel free to speak up. Do you think it is the foster youth and runaways, the LGBTQ and youth, the adults in labor exploitation, or people experiencing homelessness? Which group do you think is the most under-identified? Homeless. Awesome. Thank you, Lance. I appreciate it. Okay, so what is interesting? All of these are some of the most vulnerable for being hidden and unseen. But those that are actually the most hidden are the adults that are experiencing labor trafficking. And when we think about it, we can be like, oh, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense, right? Because it looks legit. It looks like they're working, and so everything must be fine. But the reality is they go under the radar more than any other group. And I would say after that, it's going to be the LGBTQ. Okay, so now let's talk about how the traffickers operate. How do they find their victims? This is really important because we're going to talk about these recruitment methods. 67.3% of cases use social media as their primary recruitment tool. Okay, I don't know how to emphasize this enough. If you have young people in your life that you love and care about, and they have social media, please be in their business. Just be in their business. There is no reason for us to, respect their privacy when it comes to social media. It's just not a thing that we can risk. That is the primary recruitment tool that traffickers are using. So for me, it's the equivalent of, how they have to, if you're a sex offender, you have to be registered sex offender in the areas that you live in. And for me, it feels like it's a known fact that there are so many sexual predators on social media. And it's like we're dropping our kid off at the community park in a neighborhood that is known to be rampant with, sex offenders. And that's what we're doing when we leave them online unsupervised, not surrounded with no guardrails in place, no protection, we're leaving them to the wolves, and they are not equipped for those types of scenarios. That's why they're so vulnerable. The average age of an individual trafficked in the United States is 12 to 14. So, how easy is it to fool a 12 to 14-year-old? I wasn't that smart at 12 to 14. I don't know how smart you were, but I wouldn't have been able to manage that myself. So, I feel like we need to be aware of the fact that they are very, very vulnerable when they are online. So we don't want to risk those that we love being left on their own in that world. Okay, so some of the things that recruiters are doing, they're offering false jobs, modeling, travel, waitressing, entertainment. Then there's the romance recruitment, the lover boy. And this is where they're posing as a partner, sometimes for months before they actually exploit them or ask them to do anything. They will do the whole ruse. The other is peer recruitment. They're using victims to recruit their own friends and classmates, which is really, really difficult for those particular victims because then they feel like exploiters themselves. There's a lot of healing that has to happen for those that were forced to do peer recruitment. But again, they're being threatened. Their families are being threatened. Their own lives are being threatened. They're being abused if they don't do what they're told. Online gaming and Discord. These are unmonitored spaces where youth are very accessible and vulnerable. Again, these are places where predators are interacting with our kids on sometimes a more consistent basis than the parents are. So I am a big fan of limited online time. When I was raising my kids, you have a certain amount of time a day that you can be online. It has to be in open spaces. All devices are turned into my bedroom at night. I mean, we just had things in place, but still there's a vulnerability and a risk for online gaming and Discord. Labor trafficking poses as employers offering housing and income. And the average age of a trafficker of minors, and this is very interesting, is 28 and a half years old. So do you see how the average age is getting younger when it comes to those that are trafficking others, especially our minors? And nearly 1 in 5 trafficking arrests involve a gang-affiliated individual. Again, when I was running emergency housing for victims, we had quite a few that were being trafficked by a gang. And the fear that they experienced was off the charts because of the things they had witnessed, the things they had experienced, and the vast amount of just individuals involved. They felt like they had to look around every corner and be on hyper alert because when it's a whole gang, you feel like they have eyes everywhere. Okay, so yeah, just ditch the phones. Yes, I know. I was watching an interview with Tucker Carlson the other day, and he doesn't have a computer. And I was like, how interesting. And he said he hadn't since, I think, 2012. I was like, well, I guess you can live and survive without it. We're just not used to it anymore. Okay, let's talk about the grooming sequence. This is always relational before it's transactional. So first of all is they're choosing the target. They're identifying vulnerabilities. They're looking for family conflict. Is this kid isolated and alone? Do they have a financial need? Again, these are things they're usually finding out via social media. Then they're going to connect. They're going to be kind and attentive. They're going to be generous. They may be giving them gifts and attention and just making them feel so seen and valued. And again, that can last 2 to 3 months. Then they start isolating and they're going to start cutting off family and friends. Well, they just don't understand you like I do. And anything that they can use that the youth gives them against their family, they will use it and remind them of how, your family's just not there for you and you can't trust them. Then they're going to create dependence. This is where they're going to create financial, emotional dependence, housing or substance dependence. Again, you've got 15.7% introduce drugs during the recruitment so that they can get them hooked easily and then they become the supplier. And then they start exploiting. That's when the ask begins. The relationship shifts, and then the victim feels trapped, they feel ashamed, and they feel out of options. And that's when they now move into control. They either have debt bondage, they have confiscated their IDs, they have threatened them or their families. They're telling them, like, I know where you are, I have your location. They're letting them know I can find you and I can harm you. 36.7% used psychological abuse. Okay, so let's talk about why this even exists, right? Because our heart would be that it didn't exist. That would be our dream. But it exists because there is a demand. The demand is the biggest part of this pie. Okay, when you look at what is involved, the three players that are involved in any trafficking situation, you have the victim, the trafficker, and then you have the buyers. That is the biggest group. It outnumbers the traffickers and the victims probably, I don't even know, a large percentage. It's way more than 10 to 1. It's much bigger than that. I'll have to figure out that stat. But that's the biggest problem we have are the men that are willing to pay to purchase children in order to have sex with them. So 20.6% of men will pay for sex at least once in their lifetime. That is a fifth. That's a fifth of the men in our nation. So 1 in 5 is a large demand problem. 25% of buyers account for 75% of all transactions. So you see, we have these repeat buyers, those that they are trapped in this world and they are continuing to purchase over and over and over. So I tell people all the time, if we wanted a target group to make the biggest impact, it would be to target the repeat buyers. Those are the ones that are accounting for 75% of all transactions. So if we could just focus on repeat buyers and have higher, consequences for them, and if we focused restorative care, rehabilitation on that group, or at least locked them up, that would alleviate a big portion of what we're dealing with when it comes to trafficking. But this is what's interesting. 64% of buyers said that they wanted to stop. Okay, they wanted to stop, but they didn't know how. And these are, this particular group of stats is provided by Ty Bowden. He works at the Net in Fort Worth, and they have the MACE program, which is Men Against Sexual Exploitation. He's an amazing friend in this field that I've worked with for many, many years. But for men that want to get involved, he would be a great resource for you. So reach out to Ty Bowden at the Net and get connected. If you're a man that's like, I want to get on this battlefield and be on the offense instead of the defense, he would be a great one to connect with. Okay, let's talk about the signs. Okay, because if you're in a public setting, if you're at hotels, restaurants, hospitals, schools, truck stops, or transportation hubs, these are things that you can be on the lookout for that could be signs that someone is being trafficked. If you see someone who looks very fearful, anxious, or submissive, their eyes are down, okay? They are avoiding eye contact in a way that feels really off. Victims are not allowed to make eye contact out in public. They are not allowed to, because that could be potentially a connection with someone that they could give a distress, look to. So they have to look down. If they don't look down, if they make eye contact, they could be punished for that. So if you see someone that is just avoiding all eye contact, they look very submissive and afraid, that is something that's way off, and you should see that as a sign. If they defer to another person before they speak, okay, they can't answer simple questions freely, that's another sign. And again, you're putting these signs together to say, okay, something is off here. We see this especially in medical situations. If a victim is brought into an ER, they're not going to speak about what's wrong with them. Someone is speaking for them and they're telling the story for them. And so they're, again, if you have trained medical, they're going to try to separate that victim from the person that is trying to control them so they can speak more freely. Now, what we have also seen is that sometimes they are forced to keep an open line on their phone. So even if they are removed and they're brought into a private setting, they may still be, connected to the trafficker or the pimp because they have an open line on their phone. So that's another thing. If you happen to be in the medical community and you want to, be able to engage, just be looking for some of those things as well. They don't carry their own ID, phone, or money. That's being controlled by someone else. If there are signs of physical abuse, brand marks, or tattoos suggesting ownership, those are other really big signs that someone is being trafficked. If they live or work at the same location around the clock and they're never seen alone, that's another big indicator. If you have an older or a controlling companion, again, who speaks for them and never leaves their side, that's a sign. And if the individual has multiple cell phones, that is another huge sign. Every girl that we've ever seen, she's got multiple phones that she's having to work. If they have unexplained new jewelry or clothing or cash with no income source, then that's another sign. If they don't know their own address, that they can't give you a physical address, or they don't even know what current location they're in, they don't know what city they're in, that's another big sign that you may see in public that you could identify. Thank you, Lance, for dropping that into the chat. I appreciate you for always helping me out. Okay, now what if it's a loved one? If this is your friend or family member, if you are a teacher or a coach, or you're in, a church community, these are things that you would want to be paying attention to. Again, 80 to 90% of US victims are exploited by someone that they already know. So if this is someone that you know, these are the signs that you're going to be looking out for. Is there a sudden withdrawal from family, friends, or normal activities? That is a huge sign. And I would say again, that feels really subtle, but it's speaking volumes. So pay attention. If someone in your family is kind of lively and they're very connected and they love to get together and share and talk, and all of a sudden they're just withdrawn and you can tell a different demeanor, that is something to be concerned about. If they normally were involved in extracurricular activities, maybe they, love volleyball and now they aren't interested at all and they don't want to be involved anymore. If they have a newer or older controlling romantic partner, especially if there's a significant age or power gap, that is a huge issue to be paying attention to. If all of a sudden they have these unexplained gifts, oh, my boyfriend gave me a phone, or he bought me this jewelry or these really nice clothes. I don't know about you, but when I was a teenager and I was dating, I did not have a boyfriend that could buy me those things. A teenage boy didn't have those kind of resources to be able to give to me. So it's a sign that something is off. If they are secretive about new friends, about their phone use or their whereabouts, if they're frequently absent and they don't really have a good explanation, that is another sign. If they start using language or slang that they didn't previously know, maybe it's like street terms or sex industry terms, that's something to pay attention to. If they seem scripted or rehearsed when they talk about their situation, they have been told what to say and they're just sticking to the script. If they show fear when a particular person's name is mentioned, watch people. And again, this takes us being really present with others in the moment to be able to pick up on those things. If they do not have access to their own money, documents, or phone. Every survivor that we served, when they came into our safe house, they did not have their own ID anymore. They had no money. They had no possessions. They had like maybe some clothes and, in a backpack and like tiny little toiletries or things like that. Like they had no belongings. So everything gets removed so that they are fully dependent on their trafficker or pimp. So these are signs that you want to look for in someone that you know and have relationship with. Okay, now what do we do and how do we safeguard? Okay, let's talk about the number one rule. If you are out in public and you see some of those signs that we talked about, the number one rule is to observe and don't intervene. And this is hard, especially when, we're passionate and we know like something is going on, it's not okay. We want to do something in the moment, but we cannot confront a suspected trafficker. It is not safe to do that. Um, and we also don't want to try to remove or rescue a victim on our own. We do not want to alert a suspected victim in front of their controller. Um, Coercion is so powerful that victims may not accept help and they may actually alert the trafficker because they have been trained by their trafficker that they have to be loyal to him or to her. And so they're not going to risk getting in trouble or being punished whenever someone else is trying to offer them help. Now, I have had a case where someone contacted us because they were in a truck stop, which is another prevalent place where trafficking is happening all the time, is in truck stops. And this particular woman saw some very suspicious things happening. And when the girl went into the restroom, she went in with her and just said, "Are you okay?" And the girl actually gave an outcry and was like, "No, I'm not okay. And I don't want to go back out there. And I'm scared of him." And so that was unusual, but it can happen. But she waited until they were in a private place, not in front of the trafficker. Because again, we don't want to put ourselves or her at risk, or him if it's a male victim. We don't want to put them at risk. And we don't know, what the trafficker is capable of. Again, these can be organized crime groups, they could be gang related. And so we may not be up against what we think we're up against. So it's just wisdom to observe and not to intervene. Now, when you observe, I want you to be a really good observer and get as many details as you possibly can so that you can make really, really good reports, which is what we want to do. All right, how do we report? I want to give you everything I possibly can to help you to know how to report because, sorry, I think that that is one of the most empowering things that we can have as a community. First of all, if there's immediate danger, call 911. You want to get connected to local law enforcement because that's who can act quickly. They can be an immediate response. So I always tell people report locally immediately. So call 911 and get as much information as you can. So if you can get descriptions of the individuals as detailed as you can, what they're wearing, their height, weight, age, general build, those kind of things are going to be really helpful. If there's a vehicle and you're able to get a description of the vehicle, again, don't put yourself at risk, but if you happen to be able to get, license plate, that's amazing. But get as much information as you can, give it to local law enforcement, but then also follow up with the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Now back to the earlier comment, are they in on the problem? I don't know. I have heard some of the same conspiracies, but it's what we know right now is to work with this hotline. And the reason I encourage people to make a report to the National Human Trafficking Hotline as well as local law enforcement is because that is the only national database where anything that's trafficking related is all going into that database. So it may be that you're reporting something happening in Denton, but this is connected to the same vehicle and the same descriptions were reported in, Greenville. Like we begin to help build a case whenever we report to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. You can also access that by text. Also, there's an HSI federal tip line that you can reach out to them. There's an online chat that you can reach out to. Again, this is also anonymous, or you can go to the FBI tip line. So these are all the ways that you can report if you see something that you feel needs to be reported. Okay, let's talk about safeguarding for parents and caregivers. Sorry, going backwards. Um, Talk early about online safety. I feel like we have lost the kind of the compass when it comes to healthy versus unhealthy relationships. We don't get to see a lot of healthy relationships in our society anymore, unfortunately. There's a lot of unhealthy things that we see through movies, television, things like that. It's unhealthy or even toxic relationships. And so we're losing our compass when it comes to what healthy relationships should look like. So have those conversations early. And then body autonomy. You cannot start early enough on that conversation. Letting kids know this is not okay. People do not get to have access to your physical body. And if they do, this is what you can do. You can immediately share with me or with, someone that if you're in school or at church or whatever, immediately get help. Know who your child talks to online and which platforms they use. We have got to be experts when it comes to our kids' online activity. And one thing I did, I'll just offer this up. I did random phone checks with my kids when they were teenagers. They didn't know when it was going to happen. I would just be like, random phone check, hand me your devices. And they just had to hand them over. And I would go through and look through everything. And they never knew when that was going to happen. And that was just one way to let them know, like, I'm going to be involved in this. And like I said, we had rules around the times that they were able to use devices, and then they had to turn every device in at night, had to be put in my room so that there was no online activity at night. So know who they're talking to and what platforms they're using. And create a get your you safe first, question later policy with your kids that they know that they can call you. You're going to get them safe first, and then you'll deal with, all the questions that need to be asked later about what they were doing, who they were with, what they were involved in. But you're going to show up for them first, and then we'll figure it out later. And then establish a family code word. Um, I need help. Come get me. No questions asked right now. So come up with a code. With my daughter, we always had this understanding that at any time that she felt like some activity was not really safe, she would call me or she would text me and tell me to call her. And I knew that I was supposed to tell her, you have to get home right now. I was her excuse and I was her out. So establish ways for your kids to be able to get out of a situation immediately when they need to. And if they drop that code word, then you know to go into action. And then just for everyone, if a job offer sounds too good to be true, it is. It's just that simple. If it's too good to be true, it is, and there's a hook. Your ID and documents stay in your possession at all times. And that is so, so important because there's such a vulnerability attached to that. And then trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Um, that's one thing I would say, especially to parents, that your kids. And if something doesn't feel right, you're not wrong. I'm going to just go ahead and tell you, you're not wrong. 100% of the time, I'm telling you, you are right. There is something up with your kid. We may not know exactly what it is, but our gut is not lying to us. And then every one of you, please get your phone out and save that number tonight, so that you have that, the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So it's just there in your phone. Anytime that you may, feel like, oh my gosh, I just saw something and I need to make a report. And again, if it's something that's an immediate danger, call 911 for sure. Okay, so let's talk about what is one thing that we're going to do differently after tonight. What is one thing that you want to do differently? Oh, wow. The grandmother. Okay, so Catherine, what I will say is that we have definitely seen a massive uptick in familial trafficking. And it now accounts for 20% of reported trafficking cases. I think it's probably even higher than that, but that's just the stats that we have right now. But there is definitely a lot of familial trafficking happening. I haven't heard specifically that it's the grandmother, but that is interesting. I would love to know, where that information came from because I would be interested. Okay, so what is something that you tonight are like, okay, I'm making a commitment that moving forward, this is something that I'm going to do. And that may just be, I'm going to be observant. I'm going to be paying attention, when I'm out in public, I'm going to be looking around to see potential vulnerabilities. Yes, sharing this information with others. Yes, very good. And every single one of us, when we multiply ourselves, we're changing the community. We're beginning to get a community that is, if all of us are paying attention and we know what to do, then we could be changing the outcomes for these victims. Yes, being more visually alert. Yes, absolutely. Good. Okay, awesome. Okay, so this is the reality. Trafficking is banking on our ignorance, our silence, or our unwillingness to act. But every person who leaves tonight and tells one person, or reports one tip, or asks one question, or checks in on one young person, you have just pushed back the darkness. It's just stepping forward. It's no longer staying still or being silent. It is just taking one step forward. And I love Isaiah 61 is just like my life mandate. He says that he sent us to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners. That is our mandate. When Jesus came in the flesh, the first time he ever stood up to preach a sermon, that was the scroll that he reached for. It was Isaiah. And that's what he read was Isaiah 61. And I believe that when he left this earth, that was the mandate he left us is to go and do the same thing. We are here to set captives free, to bind up broken hearts, and to release those from prisons of darkness. And every one of us can do something, right? Every single one of us can do something, even if it's like, hey, I was a part of this webinar. Can I just share it with you? And you pass it along to someone else. Anything you do, and I have tons of recorded video trainings of all kinds, but we can share this information with others. Another really practical thing that you can do is get plugged in, if you aren't already, with Five Stones Task Force, which is part of Fort Worth Police Department. It's a great task force, meets every single month. And it's a great place to begin to learn what's happening in our community, what law enforcement is doing, what different nonprofits are doing, and how you can get plugged in and get involved. Um, okay, let me read what Catherine had. The once nation back then of Israel. Yes, a lighthouse to slaves. The people then. Yes, that's so good. Yes, the Book of Amos is huge on this. That's great. Thank you so much, Catherine. I love that. Okay, and Lance has dropped the Five Stones Task Force in the chat for you so that you can please grab that website and go check it out and get plugged in. It's such a great gathering, and you can come every month in person. They also have a virtual option. If you can't make the meeting in person, then you can join virtually. But you can learn so much, and all of their presentations are just so helpful and powerful. So I recommend that you get plugged in there. Some of my favorite stories are missionaries from back in the day that were doing all kinds of undercover work, rescuing victims. Okay, Lance has dropped all the information about the task force meetings so that you can grab that. The location, please, please, please. I want to see all of us gathered there. I think you would really benefit from getting plugged into that. And it's open to the community. So you can invite friends, bring them along with you. They provide lunch. And it's just a great community gathering. Good community to get plugged into. It's very healthy. As we're approaching the World Cup, that's something that we're all very aware of right now, that it could potentially be bringing more trafficking into our community through the summer. And that's just something that, I've been training outreach teams, and we're preparing for that. I know law enforcement is getting ready to do a lot of operations around that, but that's a place that we would just love a lot of prayer coverage. And we want, if that's happening in our communities, we want to send a very strong message that, we're not going to be easy prey for these vulnerable or for these predators. Actual examples of victims that you've seen locally. So it's quite a vast array of victims that I've seen locally. We were running emergency housing for survivors that would come from all over, different states. But when it comes to what's happening here locally, I one victim in particular, we received her through Homeland Security. They were basically brought in because she had been they broke her legs and they had tied her to a bed and left her there. And she was able to find a phone that had fallen out of someone's pocket, and she called for help. And she called the drug dealer, actually, which is crazy. That's the only number that she knew, and told the drug dealer, "They're going to kill me. I need someone to get me help." And so HSI came and got her out of there. And she had been trafficked from an orphanage. So she'd been trafficked her whole life all across the world. And when she was rescued, it was in North Richland Hills. That's where she was last being held. And that was her last trafficking experience. And she came into our safe house, and she didn't even know how old she was. We made up a birthday for her just to start celebrating a birthday every year. And so we figured she was around 40. And she's had a long journey. She's been with us because we just adopted her into our family. She's part of my family now. But it's been, 6 years since she was rescued. And it was a lot of healing that had to happen because of a lifetime of being exploited. So that's one example of a victim. Another would be there was a young girl. She was actually 17. She was being victimized in an apartment complex in Fort Worth. Her mother was on drugs, and so she was kind of forced to bring in money to take care of her and her younger sisters. And she came into our safe house and was so precious. We all fell in love with her, but her mom got put back in jail. And so she had to go back. She was like, "I can't leave my little sisters because they'll come and do the same things to them that they've been doing to me." And so she did go back. We stayed in contact with her. And I just found out, this was so cool. I was speaking at an event earlier this year, and they told me that she got out, and that they had been able to walk with her and help her to get healing. And so, sometimes you are just the first step, and it doesn't end there, unfortunately. But those are a couple of examples of victims locally that we've worked with. What else can men do? Mace and anything else? So I love that question, Lance. So I would say, if you are a man that is plugged into the local church, I would encourage you to begin, real men's groups that are targeting this issue, because men are trapped in this porn and sex addiction. And our society is just feeding it more and more and more. And it's so, easily accessible. And I tell my story all the time because it's just part of why I do the work that I do. But I had to help put my own father in prison. He went to prison in 2015 for ongoing sexual abuse of children. And it started with pornography and an addiction to porn. And that led him down a really, really dark path. And he was at church every single week. I mean, first one there, last one to leave, had keys to the church building. And yet he was trapped in this darkness, and he was doing horrific things to children as a result of it. And so men need freedom. And I think the churches should be the place that men come and they are able to say, "This is what I'm trapped in. I need help." And we, the church, are the ones that actually can help people get free. The world can't do that. And I'm not saying you don't get counseling. I think it's great, but I'm just saying if you don't have Jesus, you're probably not going to get free. So I would say local churches need to really just embrace that this is a cultural, this is the pandemic, in my opinion, that needs to be addressed, and it has to be addressed by the church. So that's one recommendation I would give for men. And also just being a man that women and children feel safe with, because that it changes our experience so that then when we're with men that are takers and exploiters and those that would use women and children, we recognize the difference because we've been in the presence of good men. Do you have any stories of the purchasers repenting, justice, turning their life around? Catherine, there's actually a book that was written by a former trafficker, and he wrote it in conjunction with the original founder of Traffic 911. And gosh, I am blanking on the name of the book. Oh my goodness. But that was the one story that I personally have read. And it was on Amazon, but you may just research on Amazon like trafficker turn to Jesus. And maybe you'll find the book because I can't think of the name. But that was one that I did read that was quite powerful, but it is a hard read, not gonna lie. It was difficult. Um, and yes, not inappropriate at all. Yes, it definitely starts with talking about porn addiction. And that's something that, when I went to visit my dad in prison, after a few years, he didn't want to have anything to do with me for a while, but finally we connected and I went to see him and basically told him, I said, you could help me if you wanted to, because you could be a subject matter expert on what led you down this path. Help me understand how men get trapped, and then help me understand how you were grooming children. What did you look for? What were the vulnerabilities? And I remember him telling me the biggest thing about this addiction is that basically your drug dealer lives with you. If you have a computer or a phone, you don't even have to risk going out to meet your dealer, so to speak. It's just right there. And that was very sobering to me to realize that this is such an agenda from the pit of hell to trap men and women now as well into this addiction. And it is 10 times more addictive than cocaine. So when I say that men are sucked into this, God made men to be visual. He made them to be desirous of women. So there would be a continuation of life. Okay. It's supposed to be that way. Men are supposed to be attracted to women so that we will have babies and we will have ongoing life. And that's the part of men that the enemy has exploited and tried to cause men to get twisted in that desire and actually continue to go to a source that never satisfies and leaves them feeling shame and regret and all the things, but nevertheless, it demands more and it requires men to keep coming back for more and more. So I have just as much empathy for what's happening to our young men. Now, the average age of exposure to pornography is 7. That is the average age of exposure. And their little minds are so vulnerable, and their neural pathways haven't even formed yet when this gets embedded in them. And so it becomes the source of comfort. It becomes the source of connection, even though it's a false connection. Um, there are young men that don't even know how to interact with an actual real girl because they've been interacting with this fantasy so much that it's actually robbed them of connecting with real girls. And so it's a very, to me, it's an epidemic for sure. I like I said, I recommend that you get plugged in with Five Stones, because then you can get connected to all the other nonprofits that are connected in DFW, well, in Fort Worth and Tarrant County especially. It's a great place to kind of on ramp yourself and learn a lot. It's just to me, I've learned a lot being in that room with a lot of experts, and then just hearing the presentations every month has been really helpful. So I recommend that for sure. And you've got my email, so please reach out if there's ever a time that you want any other specific trainings. I do a lot of training around this topic when it comes to. Okay, great. Catherine is on it. Thank you, Catherine. When it comes to, pornography, we can talk through that and how it affects the brain and how it is being used to shape our society. We can talk about, what to do in different fields if you're trying to help a church, if you're trying to help schools, what are the different ways that we can engage our community? I'm happy to help you brainstorm or provide any additional trainings that you might need. I'm here for you. Okay, well, I would love to pray before we close this out. I hope this was helpful information for you to see what the issue is, how it's happening here locally, what are the signs to look for, what you can do if you do see something. I hope that you feel empowered after this to be able to, to engage when you see something going on in a way that doesn't put you at risk, but hopefully will help protect some of these victims. All right. Thank you all for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it, and I hope it was helpful. Let's pray. Father, I'm just so grateful that when we look at the darkness, Lord, that you are greater. You are greater. That, Lord, every time your light comes, it penetrates the darkness and the darkness cannot overcome it. So, Lord, we do not lose hope. We actually have great hope. And Lord, we believe that your power is greater, that the enemy has never, ever been able to defeat you, that you have a track record of winning every single battle every single time. And so, Lord, we are asking you to push back the gates of hell when it comes to trafficking. Lord, I pray for freedom for men that are trapped in porn and sex addiction. Lord, we ask that their eyes be opened, that, Lord, they would be invaded with your love, with your compassion, with your empathy for those that they've been exploiting. Father, we pray for traffickers and pimps to to see you, Jesus, to have an encounter with you that would change their hearts. Lord, we pray for the freedom of all the countless victims tonight, God, that are just dying for someone to show up, to hear, to help, to see them. Lord, I pray that you would break through, that you would send your people, Lord, that your church would become the army that would defeat this enemy, and that, Lord, you would have freedom for all of the children that you created, that you love, that you want them to know that you are a good, good father. So, Lord, I pray that you give us courage, you give us stamina, you give us strategy and creativity, that you give us your power to be able to combat this evil in our time. And Lord, we give you all the glory, all the praise for every good thing that we get to see and encounter in this world, Lord. We know all of it comes from you. So, Father, we just pray that you give us the power to do what you've called us to do, that we would know how to help in this space, and that we would not shrink back, and that we would not let our hearts get dulled, Lord, that we would listen to your voice and we would answer the call. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, everyone. I hope you have a great evening and hope to see you all soon at an upcoming meeting at Five Stones. And I will be sharing this video with Lance. If anyone else wants it, please just email me and I'm happy to share it with you. And y'all have a good night. Thanks, everyone.